Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reggie Lee, and I'm a board member for Beat the Streets Bay Area. I would like to welcome you to our third forum. Like I mentioned, the first two were discussions around Black lives and the challenges that athletes, especially those who our organization looks to work with, face. For those of you that may not be familiar with our organization, our goal is to develop the full potential of underserved youth using wrestling as the vehicle for that development. For me, wrestling and the lessons that I've learned through it have played a huge part in my development as a leader and as a person. The first real goals that I set in my life involved wrestling, and more importantly, a caring coach and mentor who helped teach me such valuable lessons on discipline, leadership, and teamwork. Beat the Streets Bay Area was founded in 2019 due to the budget crisis in Oakland Unified School District and the possible elimination of youth sports in the city. Where we are now, due to COVID-19 and chronic underfunding, is a situation where the elimination of youth sports is continuing and, in fact, accelerating the same inequities that we spoke of in our first two forums. It is not far-fetched to say that we are really just seeing the tip of the iceberg with regard to the long-term effects that COVID-19 will have on an already present problem. To discuss, we've assembled an outstanding panel to talk through where we are and what we can do as a community to combat the ever-increasing dilemma. First, I would like to recognize a few of our partners that value these issues and play a prominent role in helping us combat them. ORIC, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Aim High, the United Way, and the California Regional Training Center. Before I hand this over to our moderator, just want to make sure, just the usual Zoom etiquette that I'm sure we're all used to at this point, but if you do have questions for the panel, please use the chat function in Zoom, and we will, time permitting, include those questions to the moderators. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Carrie Mccoy. Currently the executive director and head coach at the California Regional Training Center, Carrie is definitely no stranger to any of us within the wrestling community. Truly accomplished on the mat, Carrie is a two-time Olympian, world medalist, and a two-time NCAA champion at Penn State. As a coach, along with his current role, Carrie served as the head coach at Maryland and Stanford, along with previous assistant coaching duties at Penn State and Lehigh. On a personal note, a highlight for me was watching Carrie and Team USA win the '99 World Cup in Spokane, Washington as a high school senior. And a short time later, competing against Lehigh as a collegiate wrestler and seeing Carrie across the mat. A true ambassador for our great sport, Carrie McCoy.
Thanks, Reggie. I'd like to welcome everyone to this very important panel. It's really exciting to be a part of it and really humbling to share the panel with our panelists. It's amazing what this group has accomplished, and really excited with the California Regional Training Center to be able to partner with Beat the Streets Bay Area and all the other partners that made this possible. So excited to get started. What we're going to do to get going is we'll start off and have each panelist just give a brief introduction just so everyone knows who we're talking to, and then we're going to roll through some questions and have fun and be on about an hour worth of time. Really get down to the heart of this issue. So first we'll start off with Dr. Amanda Stanek. And Amanda, if you could just introduce yourself and give a quick bio, quick intro.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carrie. As Carrie said, my name is Amanda Stanek. I am the founder of Move, Live, Learn. I'm a researcher and a program developer. So a lot of work in youth development through different types of physical activity. My research in wrestling was inspired watching the 2011 NCAA championships and seeing Anthony Robles go out onto the mat and win a gold medal. And as a physical education professor, just couldn't wrap my head around why this wasn't taught in every PE program, but then realized myself I didn't have a clue on how to teach wrestling. So that set the stage for the past decade of work and of developed research and presented at the Olympic Museum because I'm not the athlete that Carrie McCoy is. He gets to go to the real Olympics, and do a lot of work locally to help develop programs and increase numbers at the youth level. So it's an honor to learn from my colleagues on the panel, and I thank you very much to Beat the Streets for this invitation.
Thanks, Amanda. Really excited for your experience and what you're going to bring to this panel. So obviously on a personal level, Amanda and I have known each other for a long time, and it's always great to be able to reconnect with someone that's so passionate about what she does, and not just passionate about it, but very good at it. So welcome, Amanda. Next, we'll go to James Harris. James, if you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you think this panel is going to be for you today.
Well, a lot of learning, a lot of expertise, and a lot of champions out there. Man, I didn't know you were that raw, Carrie. So no, I'm interested to learn and just learn more and understand, how we can expand the opportunity for students in Oakland, particularly. I'm an entrepreneur, businessman here in Oakland. I'm old now, so I've been working in the communications field for probably about 15 years, and I'm also on the school board. And came to know Beat the Streets through a friend of mine, Larry Kane, and we worked on the Aim High board together a number of years ago. So just a lifelong lover of education, and just really love to see the look that students and kids' eyes, when they pop up, and this just incredible look of understanding and progress and growth. So I think that's what I've been about for most of my life. So I'm happy to be here and learn and participate in the panel and just learn more from each of you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, your expertise is going to be very valuable, and bringing a lot of different experiences to the table, both on one side and the other side of being involved with athletics. So really excited for what you're going to bring. Next, we'll have Sonya Phillips. Sonya, would you take a minute to introduce yourself and chat a little bit about today?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sonya Phillips. I am currently the Assistant Commissioner for the CIF North Coast section here in California. I actually was the assistant commissioner and then eventually commissioner of the CIF Oakland section, and working for OUSD. I worked with James Harris and Larry Kane to help bring Beat the Streets into Oakland, into the school district, and really tried to help build and grow the wrestling programs, starting from middle school and into the high school. And just kind of my personal experience, I born and raised in Oakland, went to school in the Bay Area, went to St. Mary's in Berkeley, and then also my father is Coach John Beam, who was a high school football coach for many years at Skyline, and now is the head football coach and athletic director at Laney College. So I've grown up in sports, not necessarily wrestling, but I played basketball, and I have quite a vast sports experience, and also different, working with OUSD in public schools, and then also going to a private Catholic school and working in NCS, and we have quite a range. So that's kind of a little bit about me and my background.
Thank you, Sonya. Yeah, definitely that range is going to be very valuable and very important. I think you're going to be able to hit a lot of things that we're going to talk about today from not only professional, but also personal level. So excited to have your participation. Our final panelist is Coach Mike Powell. Mike's coming from the Midwest, so I'll let Mike introduce himself and chat a little bit about our topic today.
Thanks, Carrie. Carrie was one of my boyhood, you're not that much older than me, but it was an idol of mine growing up. So I was a big fan for a long time. I'm the executive director of Beat the Streets Chicago. I'm a former high school coach and teacher. I started with Beat the Streets about 3.5 years ago, and it's been eye-opening. I've learned just a tremendous amount, and my empathy for the situation in urban athletics has grown tremendously, and I'm excited to start solving the problem. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, the feeling is mutual, Coach. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I'm not sure if I'm that much older or not, but what you've been able to accomplish in your very, very successful career at all levels has been something that's been an inspiration to not just me, but many people in the sport and throughout. So excited to have you here, and really looking forward to what you're going to bring to the table. So we'll start off with just kind of a general, everyone's touched base a little bit on what Beat the Streets has a connection to Beat the Streets. And as it was mentioned, Reggie talked about, the focus of increasing opportunities for underserved communities with Beat the Streets. So just a general kind of get things rolling question, without programs like Beat the Streets, what do many of our young people, what options do they have as far as, things to do outside of sports, or, without these type of programs? So this is open for anyone, and then we get a couple people to chime in on that. Oh.
I'm happy to address it briefly. We're experiencing in Chicago a dearth of opportunities that is, I've done, obviously in preparation for this and just in my job in general, I've done a lot of research that doesn't cover it. I mean, you're talking about blocks and blocks and blocks of kids who don't have opportunities for quality sports programming. And you're talking about ballet, chess, or whatever it is. There are some like safe space after school places where you go and you choose ping pong or mix and music, but quality youth sports programming is in a lot of the areas of the city, particularly the less affluent areas, is really just non-existent. And about 5 years ago, Chicago Public Schools, this was mentioned in the intros, but Chicago Public Schools dropped all elementary and middle school athletics in a day, all of them gone. And out of that has come some like intramural leagues, but they're just a fraction of what used to be. So the idea that I think there's two levels, at least in my experience, is one, lack of opportunity, two, lack of quality opportunity. And quality matters, and great coaching and great mentoring matters. So that's from my perspective, that's
awesome. Yeah, it's definitely a tough subject to chew on, just because the opportunities vary. And I think Sonia, just a question with that, just we talked about with your experience, talking about the difference between some of the more affluent private school experiences and then some of the urban public school experience, and how athletics plays into that and the opportunities that come from there.
Yeah, when I was working with OUSD in Oakland, I saw kind of firsthand a lot of discrepancies. In OUSD, there's schools who their communities are more well off, more affluent, and then there's other communities who are, kids have to be working so that they can help their families pay their bills. And you see that in the more affluent areas, they're able to pay to play club sports, or they're able to pay to get that extra trainer, or things like that. Whereas in less affluent areas, they're only given they can only play what they're given, right? They don't have extra funding or extra resources to help kind of get to that next level, or to even play outside of school. So I've definitely seen quite a range. And I think, especially during COVID, that range is kind of being magnified, where, there's been lots of AAU tournaments and kids are still being able to play and traveling, and other kids who the only opportunities they have to play are through school. And right now, at least in California, no sports are being played in high school. And so the discrepancy is getting further and further apart, and it's really sad and upsetting to see. And yeah, so.
Great. Yeah.
Carrie, if I could piggyback off that, just as an example of what Sonia said, a kid who lives just outside of Chicago proper, a couple miles away, just won the Super 32. The biggest youth and high school wrestling tournament in the preseason in the country, one of the most prestigious. And our kids in Chicago are watching that happen and thinking, clearly this kid's training. He's got a one-on-one coach. He's got somebody to pay for space. They probably moved a mat into a space, and I'm sure they're doing it safely, and kudos to him for doing it. But while our kids just have zero opportunity. They're not, their schools are closed down, their park districts are closed down, it doesn't exist. And so just, 15 miles away, it's a glaring.
Big difference.
Yeah.
A big difference.
Yeah, I think this lack of regional coordination is highlighting it even more and more. And this equity discussion is so critical. You look at when you move to trying to keep them hooked and have their identity as a wrestler, it's even hard to do Zoom workouts because we're talking about families that don't have internet access. So you have, even if the program is quality and you have these wonderful, thoughtful, creative coaches and mentors, the the obstacles that are thrown up right now they're really high, and then you're looking at transportation. Of course, in families, you might have, working long hours, 3 jobs. It's not that people aren't motivated to get their children to a new location to try to have them have an opportunity. It's that they're, again, just more and more obstacles are put in front of these kids and their families to have that access to participation, which is so unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just jump in there and say, the most glaring thing, I agree with everything everyone has just said. So I've seen the inequity play out in a couple ways. Mike, you were talking about access to gyms. It's something that you would overlook. And it's like, that's not a big deal. But kids with access and opportunity, access to a gym, and those who don't, there's a stark difference. So what happens to an athlete when you don't get an opportunity to practice mental toughness? Right? When you don't get a chance to go into, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, if you don't get a chance to lock in against your opponent or talk to somebody that can talk you through that and give you some substitutes, you lose your edge, right? And you lose your interest. And so I think in a lot of cities, in Chicago, Mike can speak to it, in Oakland, we saw crime literally cut in half last year. And this year, it was on pace to be down. When the pandemic started, crime's up. That's what happens. When you don't get a chance to practice mental toughness, you find ways to express yourself. You find ways to let that out. And unfortunately, that happens in areas where poverty is concentrated and students don't get that opportunity. So, I think what this panel is talking about today is how do we relight that fire? Because now this is not just about the inequity that's there all the time. Now there's a pandemic on top of it, right? And then it's like, so that's impacting everybody. So
yeah. And that's a great segue. And I think that, everyone kind of touched on it a little bit, but just the opportunity, you see, there's a lot of statistics saying that where athletes lose their opportunity to participate, their success rate, their graduation rates drop. And I guess we'll start with Amanda, and we can roll through that with the idea of how are the various populations affected differently when school programs are lost, when school opportunities are lost? Because, as you said, when it comes to sources of funding, affluent neighborhoods can make the adjustment to go to a club. But then we also look at, the places where people live, people where they train, how they go, but also other areas, rural areas versus urban areas. Does gender play in a factor? So some of the other populations, when school programs are lost, how are they affected?
Yeah, I think to James's really important point of your language was, to practice this mental toughness, which I really appreciate that. I always think of that as like feeling empowered, and you feel most empowered when you have this community and this sense of belonging. Right. So stripping that away from kids leading to the crime is a lot of that is just this idea of lack of empowerment. And maybe in communities where poverty isn't as high, that inability to feel empowered plays out in different ways, but they're typically not health enhancing ways. Right. So to be clear, I know we all probably would agree that a loss of any extracurricular is so sad, because whatever a kid's passion is, to take them away from that sense of belonging, that passion is really detrimental to their well-being. So I also believe that sport, it's more difficult right now as an extracurricular to continue in its normal capacity, given that the virus is transmitted through respiratory droplets. So that is a reality. Typically, I've spent the last decade telling people how wrestling is so unique because there's the singlet in every size. You don't need an expensive swimming pool. You don't even need 2 legs. You can be a boy or a girl. It doesn't care what zip code. It's why Beat the Streets is such a phenomenal organization. So now, because of the virus, all of that is kind of, again, this another really big hurdle. So we just can't express how tragic it is that when the social, emotional, and physical health that is being hindered or stunted right now. It's just very, very high. And particularly, I didn't wrestle in my life, but wrestlers are a unique breed. They're very proud. Sonya, watch out. Like, once you're a friend of wrestling, they'll keep you, they're a really tight knit group. And I worry about the mental, and we know that only 1% of kids who play sport or less than in high school go on to continue in college. But high school wrestlers 30 years later, they're still pretty dang proud. The shoulders are back, the chin is high. They're, sometimes you got to rein them in at Little League, but it is that stripping them from that sense of belonging that really, really concerns me right now. I think it would be really critical to be measuring this. I think a combination of surveys and really in-depth focus group, or maybe to help keep some of these kids in these urban communities feel a sense. Let's let them have a space to share their feelings about it. Let's let them know that wrestling will be here. The vaccine is coming, and we have learned sacrifice in sport, right? So now we're being tasked to really model it. I do think it's an opportunity to really help teach kids that this is affirm it. This is a bummer. And no, it's not fair that so-and-so down the street has a mat rolled into the basement. Like, that also is a bummer. But how you handle this right now is what you're going to remember in 30 years. And that's the story that you can come back and tell your community. So while these obstacles are great, this is what we say sport does, right? So now we need to switch maybe our pivot a little bit, and maybe we're not on the mat, but how are we helping them to take this experience, learn from it, and how can they practice, stay connected to the team, stay connected to their identity? Gosh, I hope I answered your question. I got a little fired up there, Carrie. I won't talk for the rest of the hour.
Yeah, well, we know, Amanda, you're passionate about it just like everyone else, so we appreciate that. And I think that, that leads to, and we can circle back, but that leads to another question, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, and I think with James and Sonya and Mike, everybody else can kind of fit in with it. But we talk about the benefits of athletics, and the idea of when you lose athletic opportunities compared to other extracurricular activities, what are the consequences, for lack of a better term, comparatively between losing athletic activities and other extracurricular activities?
I'll be really short. It's this idea, these were both my questions, this idea of what we know about the research of what physical activity does to our brain. Like, it gets, Spark, Rady's famous book, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain, of how it actually literally helps get our mind in a state more ready to learn. And also the stress and anxiety relief and coping mechanism that obviously that level of intense physical activity is going to put us in this state more ready to be better students. And so that is the biggest difference, that, when sport is removed as opposed to a sedentary type of extracurricular.
That's well said, Amanda. Carrie, if I could, the health inequalities were already there. You hear about food deserts, and you hear about, access to proper nutritional information even. That's exasperating. Like everything else during the pandemic, things are worse. People aren't traveling. People aren't getting on the L or on a bus. They're scared to get on a bus with 30 other people. So you're eating what you can put in the microwave, or what mom brings home. A lot of these kids are by themselves in an apartment during the day going to school, and so it's you got a working mom at home who's things are just compounded multiple times, and it's what we're seeing our kids, as we just ended them because of the increased numbers, but we had a bunch of social distance workouts, and these kids that we had contact with and regular contact with and knew who they were, and were some of our most dedicated kids. We didn't see them for 6 months, and they came back, and their bodies look soft, and their minds look soft. They were out of shape. They look like they didn't want to be at this workout, even though they really want to be wrestlers. And you see what the atrophy physically and mentally of what happens over 6 months. And for a beat the streets kid, you got to remember most of these kids didn't grow up in a club where they're wrestling year round since 6 years old. A lot of them started in 8th or 9th grade or 10th grade. And if, they're going to get all that we want them to get out of the sport, this is like pivotal time to lose. We have a bunch of kids who I think could be, potential college athletes or, could really do something that would be meaningful going forward in their life. And they're just losing, they've just lost so much opportunity, but their physical and mental state has clearly, a lot of our kids, suffered, and they're fighting. They're fighters, but
yeah.
So,
James, Sonia, any comments on that, or you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to jump in. I didn't know if you wanted to move on to the next point, but at first I would say it is a privilege to be able to go run 5 miles or 10 miles or take time out to do your stretch or whatever it is that's allowed the athletes that started the pandemic and have made it through the pandemic in good shape, the LeBron Jameses of the world, if you will. That's a privilege. Everybody doesn't have that privilege. And so we first must recognize we all probably sit in a pretty privileged position. Mike, thanks for outlining kind of what you've seen and like the softening of the body. And, I think we also just have to take the opportunity to say, this is an incredible opportunity. Like this could be the worst thing that's ever happened to us, or it could be the greatest health campaign of all time, right? What's the best thing you could do for your body, right? Is just to naturally have increased blood flow and increase just physical activity. But what's the best thing you could do to fight against COVID-19, right? Is to have a strong immune system, to have a healthy immune system. So, there is an opportunity ahead of us. I just wanted to just call attention to the privilege of being able to work out. It's just not something that every one of our inner city youth has the opportunity to do. I just appreciate how you laid that out, Mike.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, before pandemic, we were worried that our kids were spending too much time in front of a screen, whether it be on video games or TV or YouTube, whatever have you. And now not only are they still doing video games and YouTube and all that, but now they're spending 8 hours a day learning online. And so like, I know just for myself personally, working from home and having all these Zoom meetings, it's really draining, and you miss that social interaction that you have. So not only are you just kind of mentally drained, you're not out there with your friends and you're not being active. And so, it clearly pays a toll on your body physically, but also mentally, just like Amanda was saying. And, it concerns me for our youth about how their brains are developing or lack of development because they're not able to be out and be active. And so, that's just, it's one of those things we've got to figure out how to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, and transition to another topic. I'm going to start with Mike with this. So how are the different age groups, we talk about, the physical and the mental challenges, but how are different age groups affected by losing these opportunities? And, as a coach for a long time, you see where seniors and juniors in high school getting ready for college recruit or middle schools that are transitioning into high school, without the school programs, the athletic programs, what do you see the challenges and how each of those groups are affected?
So to go from high school on down, I talked a little bit about high school, and we have a lot of kids, like you said, when you start in 9th grade or even in 7th grade nowadays, kids come into 9th grade, like right college ready at this point. But a lot of our kids, they're just starting, an after school program, or, so they're getting into high school and they're developing skills and they're learning things. And that junior and senior year is when they really blossom. These kids that have been dedicated, now been in their high school programs, their high school coaches have them involved with our programming in the off season, or however, whatever their situation is, that's when they start achieving. And so now their college opportunities are lost. I've got several kids in mind when I say that, where I'm like, I'm promising college coaches this kid's special. You want this kid as a human on your roster, but without accolades, it's really hard to recruit that kid, and so there's going to be some opportunities for our sophomores, juniors, and seniors that have just been missed. And, try to spin it and say, hey, next year, we're going to help you this way. But we're pivoting. And some of our kids who maybe would have gone D3, would have gone, maybe that's a junior college route now, where you'll get here for a year and then but their routes have changed for a lot of kids, and the coaches feel helpless. A lot of these public school coaches aren't allowed in their buildings. So, it's like, and then there's all these rules about contacting kids and all that stuff. So the high school kids we're feeling that with a lot of high school kids. The junior high kids, what we've done with our junior high kids is we contact most of our junior highs serve a high school. They filter in most of the kids in one neighborhood club and then the kids that don't, or the kids that want to go to a private school or to a charter school, we make sure that we filter them into schools where we have a relationship with the coach and the administration, where we know they're going to be college ready in 12th grade. We know they're going to be in college preparatory classes. We know they're going to be well looked after as a human being, as a young woman or young man, by a coach and a leader and a mentor who cares about them far beyond the wrestling mat. But we can't do that right now. We've lost contact with a significant amount of our kids because, frankly, keeping them coming on Zoom calls, doesn't matter how many books you read with them or how many cool things you do, it's just hard to show up for a Zoom call. You know what I mean? And so we've lost contact with a lot of our kids who right now we'd be saying in 7th and 8th grade, hey, here are your 9 options. Oh, this is your neighborhood school. Are you going to go to that? Okay, great. We love your coach. Or, that your neighborhood school doesn't have a wrestling program, or the coach is a football line coach, and I think he's just kind of taking a stipend. What do you think about this school? You know what I mean? And let's so we missed that. Then you go even lower than that. Our youth programming is almost non-existent, because asking an 8 or a 9-year-old to jump on a Zoom call with an 18-year-old is not realistic. Having, in our experience, having youth Zoom calls is, I've got a 5-year-old, man. It's like, it's not easy being on kindergarten on Zoom, but then you're in school all day and then you have to jump on and be in for a 2-hour workout as a 10-year-old, so they're just almost non-existent. We've had some kids show up to our social distance stuff but now we're back virtual again. It's really hard to maintain contact with our, 700, 800, 900 core kids is down to 60 or 70 kids. And frankly, those are kids who probably need wrestling maybe a little bit less, not all of them, than other, because they have structure in their life and they have parents that say 4 o'clock, get on your Zoom call. So we feel like we've lost, we're going to get them back. I don't want to seem like we're in despair. A lot of good things are happening in Chicago on the wrestling scene, but we're going to have to fight, and we're going to have to call each one of them, and we're gonna. So
yeah. And James and Sonya, from the administrative side, being on the school board, being in the commissioner position with the athletics. How are you guys seeing, just through, obviously, in the past and compared now with the transition of opportunities missed from participating in schools, and how those are affecting, the different age groups?
I defer to you, Sonjha. I mean, you have a closer look. I'm mind blown at what Mike said, and I'm hoping somehow the story's different, but just thinking about juniors and seniors and the opportunity lost, and just, the coaches being just like, what can I do? What can I do? Just really challenging. But Sonjha, I mean, you were able to, maybe people don't know the story, like how quickly you were able to scale up a program here in Oakland, and you're so much closer to the, I mean, you were able to work miracles in such a short time, but do you have any sense of how things are now?
Yeah, so currently now I don't, because with NCS, we're only over high school. But when I was with Oakland, just like James was saying, when I first started in Oakland, before there was no structured middle school leagues or anything. So, some schools had a basketball team or a soccer team here and there, and they would play with other schools or even other club teams, really. But there wasn't anything district-wide. And so we started a district-wide middle school league, and we didn't have wrestling, but we were trying to figure out ways to increase participation, both for males and females. And so when I got on board with Beat the Streets, they were like, we would love to do this. We were also trying to increase our participation with wrestling at the high school level. And so it kind of just worked perfectly, starting them at a younger age, middle school, trying to get them used to wrestling. And then once they get to high school, know that they have a program that they can go to and coaches, quality coaches who are there to help. But, as far as the pandemic goes and the discrepancy between the younger age group and the older age group, I can't really speak too much to that. Again, like both Mike and James were saying about, the sophomores and juniors, there's just in every sport across the board, there's going to be a backlog of student athletes because your NCAA either are or aren't playing, and either it will or might not count as an eligibility year. And then you have all these kids who are going to graduate high school and then go on. And so I really have no idea what it's going to look like because their scholarship spots are going to go down and there's going to be more kids to be eligible for those scholarships. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. And like Mike said, junior college is another kind of route to do that. But I don't know, it'll just be interesting to see what happens with all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And that leads, go ahead, Mike.
Clarify real quick. And Sonia, you reminded me of this, what you said. Wrestling scholarships are incredibly hard to come by. So it's like blue chip if you're getting money from University of Illinois and or Northwestern, a Big Ten type school. What wrestling does is it often helps you get into a better Division III school than you would have got in with just your test scores and that's the things that I'm not really talking about the elite kids. And Sonia, again, you reminded me of this. It's something I should have said, but the opportunities lost are like, I'm moving up academically. I'm going to go to this school, but because I was a state qualifier, this school wants to help me. And that coach is going to put a stamp on my application and he's going to get me in and he's going to see that they find money for me. And you know what I mean? And so those are the opportunities that I really, was kind of referring to. So,
yeah. Yeah, that actually adds to what I was going to ask next, because I think, we've talked about how the athletes are affected and obviously that's a big focus that we're doing, but especially with communities, underserved communities and programs that are being helped by Beat the Streets type, the entire community is involved, right? You got a coach, you got parents, you got friends, you got family. And, so when these opportunities to compete for a school program are not there, participate in school activities, school athletics, there are a lot of other people than just the athletes affected. So, we just chat about that idea of, the overall community when, it takes a village, right? So the idea of how the rippling effects of not just, Johnny and Susie don't get to go to play their sport today, but there are other people that are affected. So, we can talk about that a little bit and just, the overall community, how they're affected by loss of athletic opportunities. James, you seem like you're ready to go.
Oh, did I? I was like, who's gonna go? And you're absolutely right. And I try not to think about it in that frame, right? I try to take the frame of we have to do something to combat this, right? So if you're a coach, what are you doing to connect with students? If you're a student, what are you doing to connect? How are you rethinking this? And it impacts teachers. And so I've watched this incredible collection of educators completely redesign how they show up and completely show up and put the curriculum to the side, in this case, put wrestling to the side and say, I just need to be in touch with you, right? I need to just know you're okay. And though that may not seem like, okay, we're on the mat, we're going one on, you're learning, you're progressing, you're potentially keeping that student or that teacher stable, right? While this happens. So I think focusing on the connection and not thinking so much about, man, how, this has really changed, this person's experience and how they are a teacher or a coach. How are you making the pivot? Maybe that's too optimistic a view, but I think I think if we don't do that, then we run the risk of losing hope, right? And that's all the thing we have. And that's in fact what kids are looking to us for as adults. So we are all been impacted, but students need us to let them know we'll get through this. There was a delay in your wrestling career, but it's just a delay, right? And sometimes that level of rationalization and conversation is just as important as the sport itself, unless you're old like me. But I don't know.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Love the optimistic. Love the optimism, and that is certainly the message we're trying to send to our kids. Is we're going to come out of this better than we ever have, and stay connected, stay involved with culture and community. But Carrie, it's a maintaining community with families, maintaining culture with coaches, and these things that we've worked so hard to build. It's an uphill, it's a Sisyphus type undertaking, but we're fighting it every day. I mean, we're working it, and we have a coaches social tomorrow, Zoom practice today, and a coaches social tomorrow night. And so, we put out a big video today about hope, and we're opening our first facility. And so we're trying to keep the families engaged, keep people excited about what's coming in the not immediate future, but very near.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate that, James.
Yeah, I know that with the school piece, that's so important. And I think one of the things that Beat the Streets does so beautifully is this proud sense of identity. When I'm working with school districts, varsity coaches will say to me, when a kid is a freshman or sophomore or junior, sometimes it's the first time in their life that particular kid was cut because families would club hop with their kids, if they weren't getting what they wanted or in the, ranked as high as they'd want to be or so forth. And I think places like Beat the Streets, and what I love about school sport is you have that community is so much tighter than a club where people are coming from wide geographical areas and then always changing. Whereas the school piece, and you get to see that's where I want to be my junior year. And then you get to be that junior. So I do think that hope and that message in places like Beat the Streets in schools is so critical right now. And I do think even with this news of the vaccines that we got this week compared to where we were 3 weeks ago, there might be more a light, like we might see that light now. And so it could really help give that hope to everyone that we all could use it.
Yeah, and Amanda, you bring up a great point, and I think we've kicked it around a little bit. Just the idea of these athletes that have the resources to go to clubs, but just the club system in general. And I know in a lot of research you've done, just talking about the benefits of being, you mentioned it just briefly there, but the benefits of being a part of a scholastic program versus just being a club program. And maybe you can just chat a little bit about that a little bit more, because those opportunities, as Mike said, this kid gets the coaching, gets the training, he gets to go to this event and do really well. But then the community piece that you were just talking about may get lost a little bit. So do you want to just talk about that idea of, the community idea of interscholastic programming versus club program and the benefits of each, or, anything like that?
Yeah, I didn't actually research specifically differences between club and school sport per se, but more looking at the opportunity for upward social mobility through the sport of wrestling, wherever
wherever it takes. Okay.
It just happened to be that the participants that I interviewed for that research, these were girls, elite world level, Carrie Mccoy level female wrestlers. They all were introduced to wrestling through school. And this was the same in developed or developing nations. And all of the girls absolutely experienced upward social mobility, despite where in the world they were from. And what was interesting, I was curious because of a previous study I did 10 years ago, the male coaches in the US and Canada, where I'm from, weren't quite as enlightened overall regarding female participation in sport as they are now. And so that's what kind of inspired that international study. And it really showed that the girls, I was curious because it's a masculine defined sport, or has traditionally been, do they experience barriers socially because they participate in it? So our study just found that it was part of the Super 8 campaign with United World Wrestling, that wrestling served as a huge opportunity for upward social mobility, which is what you all at Beat the Streets see all the time, right? Like, this is not groundbreaking, but it was very affirming to what we all know about this typical easy access into the sport if it's at a local level.
Yeah. Great.
Here,
Well, I'm going to jump in. We've got some questions from the chat. So go ahead, Mike, and then we'll jump into some of those from the chat.
So I live in a suburb that borders the west side of Chicago, which is one of the most difficult, most challenging places to live in the city in terms of socioeconomic difficulty and violence and all the rest of it. The resources that my student athletes had at Oak Park, 1 mile east of me, do not exist, right? So the days of Muhammad Ali walking down the street, knocking on the police athletic league and finding a boxing ring and a coach that's going to change history, sport history forever, that doesn't exist anymore. It does not exist, at least in Chicago. I can't speak to Philly or Oakland or anybody else. In Chicago, those gyms do not exist anymore. So in terms of, just outside of the city limits, though, they do. And so there's a dearth of resources. The built environment of the city kid in Chicago, it's not accessible at all. And obviously we're trying to change that. We're opening we're opening a standalone facility on Chicago's south side that is for the city kids. But that's one small anecdote. To answer your question about pay to play versus accessible school-based athletics, or it's so much different than it was just 30 years ago in the city of Chicago that it's not even recognizable anymore. And I don't know if there's a de-emphasis on athletics in Chicago public schools, or it's a lack of funding, or what, or I don't know what it is, but there is serious decay there, and the opportunities that were once there 30 or 40 years ago in the city, I guess they never really existed in the suburbs or the city, but as these super groups, this club volleyball, top tier baseball in Illinois, it's Izzy style wrestling. Nothing against any of the kids there or that guy, but you need a mom or a caretaker and a minivan, and you need about $1,800 a season, and you need somebody to drive you there, make your meal ahead of time, while you do, eat your sandwich, do your physics work, wait for you at practice, and then drive you home. Right, that just doesn't exist in the neighborhoods that we're dealing with, that we're in, and so there's a major disconnect in terms of opportunities and resources.
Yeah. Well, that actually it's a good segue into one of the first question, and this is, and I apologize if I mess up anyone's names, but Sandy Baker Fakosi. She writes, for a typical less affluent working parent, it is difficult to know which programs are quality. Also, the time to get students to program not held by schools always there. So, any tips on leading to figure out those type of opportunities where, if it is an opportunity to go to a club, or if it is an opportunity for a program, how would you advise a parent to find those opportunities?
If you find some that interest you, I would reach out and ask to talk to parents of other participants currently in the program, and ask for like a couple very different type of personalities, and I would get their experiences to help maybe narrow it down.
That's good. So we have another comment from Clem Tanaka, and Clem says, I agree with the lack of opportunities, but I also think the issue is there needs to be more enthusiasm for the sport. Living in the SEC country, it's no problem getting football players, but difficult to get kids excited with wrestling. Once there's a demand for something, community supports normally follow. Look at lacrosse, it's one of the fastest growing sports in the country. What are your thoughts on how we can get kids to want to get on the mat? As an aside, has anyone been following Wade Chalice's perspective on this topic?
Carrie, if I can take this one.
Yep.
If you build it, they'll come. It's not about wrestling. It's not about lacrosse versus wrestling. It's about culture. It's about community. It's about family. It's about leadership, right? So this community that I coached with these incredibly successful high school teams that had zero history of, that's not true, had very little history of wrestling. I took over for some great men who had some decent teams, but with this community that surrounded it, that was built out of just people in the community, lifted us up for 15 years and continues to do that. And it's far more about culture than it is about anything else.
Yeah. Got another question from Sandy. In education, a lot of research is being done regarding cradle to career. Is there research about how students' involvement in sports affect individuals' career outcome? So again, just some of the benefits of athletics and activities. So just anybody have a good answer for Sandy?
I mean, I just highlight, I don't want to put the numbers out because I could probably easily be corrected, but I know that in the percentage of women involved with Fortune 500 companies, there is the large majority of them were student athletes in college. So that would be a quick Google and you get the actual numbers. I don't want to be called out, but that is for sure one very, very clear example in the research that's out there.
Okay, got another question from Fernando. Has MMA changed the dynamics of who comes out for wrestling at all? Are more kids coming out at higher numbers, or is it still the coaches, coaches and athletes recruiting?
In my experience, it has helped with awareness, but not necessarily with numbers. I think sometimes kids have they think they know more about it coming in, but obviously, wrestling's the world's hardest sport. So for the first month, you realize pretty quickly I'm neck deep in this, and in my experience as a coach, I stopped coaching in 2018, but I'm obviously very close to our programming. It is more people are aware of how awesome wrestling is. I don't know that it's helped our numbers in the sport necessarily. Maybe it has, but I haven't seen any research on that, and I haven't felt that experience myself. So.
Yeah, and just like I think, like Amanda said, you can probably research that pretty good, and we've definitely seen some successful wrestlers transition. And I talked to a kid this past weekend, and his goal was to get into MMA. And between he and his support network, they knew wrestling had to be a big part of it. So, getting to an opportunity where they could wrestle and increase their skills, knowing that the end game was MMA. So ironic to get that question, because I think that when you look at across the spectrum of MMA, you see a lot of wrestlers doing really well. So it is a good deal. And just through the last few years, I think, when the early parts of it, you had a bunch of wrestlers that jumped in and it wasn't as mainstream, and now it's dominated by wrestling. So it's transitioned just like everything else. So it's pretty exciting to see. But there are a lot of factors that go with where you go. But I definitely would say the research is out there, or the results are out there, and just got to figure out what other things are associated with it. I've got a question from Stuart White. Let's see, I think I can think of 2 middle school wrestling leagues for school teams, and I can think of several others, at least at rec level in New Jersey. From what I can tell, they are driven by coaches. School coaches get together, some select someone to lead, they organize a league. maybe where they don't exist, they need organizational assistance. Can BTS jump in the void and give assistance to answer the how questions of organizing school leagues where they're needed? So I think Mike, Coach Powell, with the idea of what you're doing in Chicago, and I'm sure, with Oak Park and the success that they've had there, you've had a bunch of experience of getting things done. But Beat the Streets overall, I mean, Sonia talked about how getting support for the programs earlier. So just some ideas and some feedback on getting programs started.
I would say that reach out to the closest couple of Beat the Streets groups to you, and I'm sure their program coordinators would be happy to help advise. I'm on calls once a week with people that want to start, nonprofit wrestling clubs or Beat the Streets groups, or so there's people reach out all the time, and the Beat the Streets network is full of really impactful people, very knowledgeable.
So another, and we're kind of winding down in our time here. So just wanted to just chat. We've talked about funding a lot and support, and again, jumping back to Sonia and James and the administrative experience that you guys have you guys been able to, well, obviously you've been able to come up with ideas of funding models and adjusting funding models of support and, really making it more accessible. And I mean, this is probably a whole topic itself, but maybe just some ideas of, adjusting current funding models and areas of support to help opportunities for underserved communities, or, to keep our young people engaged in sports when, we're faced with various challenges. So it's a pretty broad question, but just the idea of, from the administrative side, when you're looking at different things, you got to balance a budget, but you want to create opportunities. So I think that'd be a good one to kind of lead off into.
Yeah, so I'll just start. So when I was with OUSD, a lot of the work that I was doing was trying to tie in our LCAP funding into athletics. And so LCAP is, forgive me, I don't know what the acronym stands for. Essentially, it's the federal and state funding that you get based on kind of like how you're using the money. So basically you have to show how you're using the money and how it relates to the topics that, or the goals that are set. And so we kind of had to be not really creative, because in all, athletics, as we know, there's research that shows how much athletics help build a student and help them to grow developmentally and academically and everything else. So one of the things that was really helpful was really tying in those LCAP goals with athletics and how, and trying to be creative to show that you're meeting those different goals. And so that's just kind of one thing from a public school kind of standpoint that, I don't know, James, if you want to kind of dive a little deeper into that.
No, I think that's right on. And, with the local control accountability plan. So, and that's, so you set up this plan to basically say, here's the money that we're going to give you, that you gave us, and here's how we're going to spend it. And, what happens with sports is, it just like with any state government, it's got tons of competing interests, right? And it's, well, what's more important, reading or sports? What's more important, math or sports? What's more important, language or sports? And so sports ends up coming last on the list. And so, and that's not because sports is last on the list. It's because, that's the paradigm we live in, right? We deprioritize sports, even though, a majority of CEOs or people that have risen to a high tier professionally enjoyed sports because they're learning cooperation, because they're learning how to work with others, how to build teams, how to lose. I won't say anything about the election, but with dignity, I won't say anything like that. But it falls to the last of the list. So a couple of ideas that I think that we've tried in Oakland: public-private partnerships, obviously partnering with groups like Beat the Streets. That's going to be the future for most public school districts, right? So where you have the relationship with investors, where you have the relationship with talented coaches, with people with historic expertise like Carrie and Mike and Amanda and Sonia, where you can bridge those gaps where school districts just aren't nimble enough to do it. And school districts really should, not beyond public-private partnerships, school districts should really think about levying parcel taxes that help to pay specific, that are earmarked only for sports, only for language activities. And I think what we found in Oakland, that's what we did with Measure a couple of years back called Measure G1, where we said, okay, the state has cut all of our athletic funding. Now we want to tax you to pay for it, right? Which may seem like a tough lift, but it passed by like an 85% majority, right? People want to see their kids win. And so I just think we have to get more creative as public agencies about how we're paying for it. The money is certainly there. We're richer than we've ever been as a country. So public-private partnerships, and think about a tax. Man, I sound like a politician. I'm sorry, Carrie.
Yeah, the one other thing that speaks to a couple of these questions that were submitted about fostering the relationship, getting more people on board, that actually is even how I ended up here 10 years later. Locally, they were going to cut 3 of the 4 high school programs in the district of which I live. And so I wrote a 3-minute spiel and told my husband, who used to wrestle, hey, you got to read this at the school board meeting tonight. He's like, no, you have to, because you don't have cauliflower ears. And so I went and read it, and they didn't put it for a vote that night. Our kids weren't even in school yet. I think this idea of reaching out to the champions of the sport within the community and encouraging some of them to run for school board. Some of the panelists here on the school board, they are extreme. Everyone talks about, why won't administration hire wrestling coaches? Administration would love to hire wrestling coaches. They get thousands of resumes for one teaching position at a school, right? So if you have champions on the school board, if you reach out to the people and encourage them to share the good stories, when our numbers started rising locally at our youth level, of which kids can come for free, by the way, the school district gives the space, we started emailing the superintendent and the school board members each year, hey, we're up 20%. Hey, these are a bunch of really nice volunteer dads delivering this program several nights a week. And we're just letting them know, hey, our numbers are coming. Well, last year, 2 of the high schools actually did well at state. I mean, so this is, 8 years in, I think just getting people on board, because a lot of us are only experienced with wrestling before we really knew the sport was someone spitting in a cup. Like, we just didn't know. We just didn't have positive thoughts. We didn't really have any thoughts. I'm from Canada, so it was only hockey on TV. But like this idea of just educating our communities, bringing on the champions, encouraging them to run for school board, letting the principal know these stories. I bet you Beat the Streets does a beautiful job of that with their partner schools, is like reaching out and sharing, this is what so-and-so did. Like, they stopped and held the door. Like, look how far, like, little things that you can't really measure on a survey. I really encourage the wrestling community to do as much of that as possible at the local level.
Carrie, if I may add to that, Beat the Streets is the fastest growing group of wrestlers in the country collectively. So we think collectively. We're not 100% certain on these numbers yet. Yaru, the executive director in LA, is compiling a list of numbers. We're going to have some metrics for everybody soon, but we think we're north of about 12,000 wrestlers, and we're growing exponentially. We're adding cities, 3 or 4 cities every year. We're going to add a couple in the next couple of months. And we are the fastest group of women's wrestlers in the country by a long shot, right? So there's some real positives here. And coming out of COVID, obviously, everybody's numbers are going to drop a little bit, and then we're going to bounce back. But there's some real messaging there. When you add women to males wrestlers, then there's an equity piece there that's really important to the health of our sport that we need to talk about a lot. We do it at Beat the Streets. We need to talk about it as a wrestling community. And to piggyback off of what Amanda said, the wrestlers have often been their own worst enemy. You be stoic, you don't be braggadocious, you just put your head down and you do your work. But if you're not telling the community about it, and they're not excited about it, it's real easy to cut this niche sport that not that many people know about, right? So that's that is a really big piece. And then James, by the way, when James, you're ready to move to Chicago, we'll have you. But until then, what we've done at Beat the Street Chicago is we continue to partner with park districts and Chicago Public Schools, but we recognize their inability to support us the way we want our programming to go. So we will continue those neighborhood programs as long as they'll have us, and we'll continue to grow this network of neighborhood programs. But we've started this facility model because the built environment needs to change, frankly. The Police Athletic League needs to come back, and we're going to have world-class coaching. You know, I hired Mike Dixon, former associate head coach at Indiana University, as good a man and as smart a man and as capable a man in the sport of wrestling as there is. We hired one of the best coaches I've ever met, and we hired an Olympian. You know, so Haley Augello and Mike Boyd. So they're going to run the programming at this facility. And so for the first time in a long time, and this is all privately funded now. So we've raised a bunch of money, but for the first time in a long time, the city of Chicago, the kids of Chicago are going to walk into a building that they own, right? That Beat the Street symbol on their chest is prideful. There is community, there is culture, right? That's got to be private. It's privately funded for us. And so I hope, you know, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, takes notice and wants to give us 10 more of these facilities. But until they do, I think the wrestling community, and this is a really, really big piece. Tom Ryan built a $50 million athletic complex for like 40 kids every year. And good for him. Thank you for getting behind him, Ohio Wrestling. I could fund all of Beat the Streets for like 10 years, nationwide. You know what I mean? So let's get the wrestling community behind Beat the Streets LA, Beat the Streets Lancaster, these Beat the Streets Bay Area, these groups that are doing the work to grow our sport, which we all talk about all the time, right? To grow women's wrestling, which we all talk about all the time, and to do more than just have a safe space. So one of the things that's really important when we're talking about this, and one of the things I recognized early on when I went from Oak Park to trying to grow city wrestling, is contact hours aren't there. If you get a kid at 12 or 13 years old and she or he has learned some of the wrong things, maybe doesn't have good grades or a great diet or whatever it is, you got to press into those kids. It's got to be 350 days a year, right? If you're gonna teach a kid to be gritty and challenge him or herself constantly and fight the good fight, they have to trust and they have to love their coach and mentor. And for that to happen, real contact hours have to be there. And for us, that's this private, building it in the environment where the kids live, that they own and are going to call home. That's paramount to us in terms of our model. I think we can do both. I think Beat the Streets can do both. I think we can continue to partner with park districts and municipalities and school districts, but I also think we have to start looking at, really marketing ourselves and going after private funding. All the other sports do. It's real easy to take your kid to and I'm sorry to get on, I'm on my soapbox now, but you can tell I'm passionate about it. It's real easy to take your kid to club volleyball. It looks great. The coaches are professional. The curriculum is done right. There's a key card to get in or whatever it is. We can do that. We're doing it right now as we speak in multiple cities, but we can create these scenarios and we can create them. They don't have to be for profit. They can be run by nonprofits. We can raise the money. We can bring great people to them. And our city kids can be coached better than they are in the suburbs. They can have facilities as good or better, right? They can have life-altering program like Carrie probably experienced, like I certainly experienced in my tenure as an athlete and a coach. These kids can have this in the city. The wrestling community has to get behind it. We have to step up. Yeah.
Well, that's a great transition. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for their time. Mike, Amanda, Sonia, and James. I mean, this was awesome for me. Being affiliated with you Superstars has just been a highlight for me. So thank you for your time. Anyone that we missed questions, obviously we could go on this for a long time, but we are limited with time. So I apologize if we didn't get to your question. Someone will respond, and feel free to reach out to us individually, social media, email. You can find ways to contact all of us in some way. So, but again, it was my pleasure to participate and to moderate this important topic. And we look forward to another opportunity to share with everyone in the future. Now I'm going to hand it off to Talia Bennett, who's our our development coordinator for Beat the Streets Bay Area, and great segue from what Coach Powell was talking about. And I think Tyler's got a great message to finish us off.
Thank you, Carrie, and hello to everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Talia Bennett, and I work very closely with Beat the Streets Bay Area and some of our other chapters as well. And so I do want to say thank you to our panelists, thank you to our audience, thank you to our current donors who are on listening, Beat the Streets Bay Area board members, thank you for helping us put this together, Beat the Streets Chicago and Beat the Streets National. Thank you all, everybody, for joining us today. This has been a beautiful conversation. I have worked in the nonprofit sector for over 12 years. And by the time youth get to me, I specialize in working with youth on probation. Okay, and I work very closely with our Alameda County Department of Juvenile Justice and Adult Probation, which is located and services Oakland Bay Area. And so by the time our youth get to me, they're already fighting gun charges. They're already fighting drug charges or assault and robbery or murder. Okay, and so I do want to touch on how Beat the Streets, the work that Beat the Streets is doing, all of our chapters, when we're talking about servicing the underserved communities and inner city youth. This is tied to violence prevention. Our data shows that when young kids and youth have positive mentors, okay, and these types of programs like Beat the Streets to participate in, it helps our youth and our kids to make better critical life decisions. You're talking about areas like Oakland, okay, our executive director, Dan, he services Oakland. Our executive director for Chicago, Mike, is servicing Chicago. And so you're talking about Chicago and Oakland, where we have high levels of youth crime and gang activity and violence. And so it is very important that we continue to raise funding for programs like Beat the Streets and these chapters to support our inner city kids and our youth of color in particular. It makes all the difference when they have coaches and mentors, and when our parents, who a lot of them are single parents, have a safe space, whether you're talking about a facility where our youth and kids are able to go, or even virtual for the time being while we're having COVID, having this virtual model. We need programs like Beat the Streets to continue to be able to service our underserved youth and communities. So I'm just inviting everyone to please support us in our chapters. And here's some ways that you can do that. You can go onto our websites. Beat the Streets Bay Area is a newer chapter, so we need a lot of support. We need to, for example, raise funding to hire a full-time executive director. So you can help us with that. If you can reach out to your networks to help us with that. So you can go onto our website to donate. Each chapter has their own website, whether you're talking about Beat the Streets Chicago or Beat the Streets National or Beat the Streets Bay Area, Beat the Streets Los Angeles. We all need funding to support our programs, our operational expenses, and our staffing. You can also, we're always looking for new board members too. Okay, so there's many ways for you to give back. Whether you're going to donate funds, or you're going to offer to join one of our boards, or support our fundraisers. Beat the Streets Bay Area will have a fundraiser coming up, a virtual fundraiser that we're planning for February of 2021. And so we'll send out those invites to folks. But I just coming on here to remind everybody to connect the dots. Programs like Beat the Streets are servicing our most vulnerable populations, our youth of color, and they are in trouble. This generation under us are in trouble. And so we need these programs to continue so that our young kids and youth have strong mentors and safe spaces to go. okay, to help deter them from gang activity and making bad decisions that can have them end up in court. Okay, a lot of times when I'm with a young person, a 19-year-old, sometimes there's a life sentence being handed down for murder by the time they get to me. Okay, so this is violence prevention, and I want everybody to connect the dots on this. People sometimes don't connect the dots, but programs like this help our youth to deter them from going into a crime. Okay, so please support our chapters. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate everybody. Thank you, Carrie, for moderating.
Great job, everyone. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. I'm sure we'll have more panels, more discussions, more opportunities to support Beat the Streets and the great programs that are going on. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Right on, you too.